Chris White, Director of Programming and Production at POV. I am here today with Louis Alvarez and Andy Kolker, two filmmakers whose film American Tongues actually launched the POV series in 1988. Louis and Andy have, over the past 35 years, produced critically praised documentaries for their production companies Kingfish Productions and the Center for New American Media. So, 35 years in the business, 35 plus. Tell me how you guys got started.
Back then, we were using black and white, reel-to-reel Portapacks, if anybody remembers that technology. It's funny because it was, you could do things. It was a little clunky. But at the time, we always sort of foresaw there would be a time into the future, in the horizon, sometime when, everyone would be able to have a camera. Everyone would be able to make movies. Everyone would be able to sort of solve the kinds of problems that we were dealing with, kind of on a daily level at NOVAC, at New Orleans Video Access Center. It took 30 years for that to actually happen. But today, we can get into this later, but today, in fact, the technology has cheapened to the point where pretty much everybody can make a documentary.
Actually, I watched American Tongues and Louisiana Boys last night, and the thing that struck me first was the intro cards. I think it said a video cassette.
A videotape by
Louis Alvarez and Andy Kolker.
Well, we used to argue about that. We used to say, well, you can't really say a film by because it's not film, and it actually was very politically important to distance ourselves from the old 16mm film documentarians. We very much set ourselves off as different kinds of guys. So the question is, what do you call it, a videotape? There wasn't the language. And yeah, I kind of wish I could go back and change it, but at this point, it's a nice historical artifact.
And we started calling them a film by anyway. And because I think we also saw that the movies we were making, for the most part, we thought of them as films, even though they weren't really, there was no particular theatrical, distribution possibility at that point for our films, or really for any documentaries at that point.
Who do you think has a funny accent?
People from New York or Philadelphia, and Virginia especially. Our grandkids in Virginia, and they have that Virginia dialect, I have to live twice to catch on, to get that dialect,
Wisconsin people.
Why do you say Wisconsin? What do they sound like?
Because when they say their O's, they're going out and about. They do. They're really bad. They sound like they're Norwegian.
Was it the social and political issues that initially brought you into the field of documentary, or do you see documentary as an art form? What is it that really attracts you about it?
We were living in New Orleans. We were surrounded by this incredibly rich kind of native culture, and nobody was telling stories like that, whether it was in New Orleans or whether it was in Appalachia or whether it was out west. And we said, first of all, we wanted to try to capture that, and documentaries seemed like a good way to do that, to actually go out in a truck and drive around the country and ask people about the way they talk, people you wouldn't normally see on television in those pre-reality show days. The other thing that was very important to us was, and I think it came from living in New Orleans, which, as everyone knows, is a 24-hour party town, is that we wanted our stuff to be entertaining. We wanted it to be funny. At the time, a documentary was this kind of earnest thing. It was kind of an eat your peas, feel better, learn something, but really it's not really fun to actually watch. And we said, we don't want to do that. We want something where you can sit around on Saturday night with your buddies and have a really good time. And at the end of it, yes, you've learned something and maybe you're going to take action, but meanwhile you've had a really good time, you've entertained. So that was really what has always animated us from the beginning.
Louis Alvarez, co-director.
We wanted to make a film about American diversity. We wanted to show that the country is as vibrant and different in different parts of it as it's always been, and that television has not made us all the same. And we didn't want to make a film which had already been done before, a film about food or a film about different sports in different parts of the country, something like that. And we hit on the idea of language, because in our travels we always noticed that people talk differently in different parts of the country, and we weren't all sounding the same.
The things that, if there's anything that comes up, at least fairly often after people have seen the show, it's the fact that everyone seems to be either offended or strongly affected by some portion of the show, by someone in the show. And usually that's because there's an identity. They're identifying with something that's going on the show, what someone has said, some prejudice, some like or some dislike that that person has exhibited, which probably hits a little bit too close to home. So we like to think that we've been able to offend just about everybody in the country in the show.
I don't think they perhaps have the same values of hospitality that we do in the South. And so I associate all of that with the sound of their voice. And it's grating on your ears. Maybe our sound is also, but it's usually very nasal. And a lot of times the things they say are not kind.
Now, let's talk a little bit about characters who you seek out when you're making a film.
Let's take American Tongues, for example. We were looking for people who somehow represented almost a way of speaking, but they could do it in a way that was friendly to the camera, that also brought out in other people their dialects and the way they spoke. So you could really kind of get a sense of the subculture based on the way in which these people kind of interacted with us and interacted with the camera. And so we call these folks ringers, because you sort of look for somebody who had a kind of a personality. Usually it was a big personality, but not always. But usually it was somebody who felt incredibly comfortable with the camera, incredibly comfortable to sort of let their story be told, and they would just kind of corral other people. You know, and at that time, you got to try to understand that not everything in America was being documented the way it is today. Okay, so bringing a camera into a situation could very much alter it in a way which, you know, and the camera always alters situations, but much more so back then. It was a really, it was a real intrusion in some respects, and people looked at it that way. They were not camera savvy.
Julio, come here, will you please, for a minute? You look all gagato. What's the matter? Rough night? Seriously, did you make it to my party Friday?
Well, you'll find that a lot of
What
us
happened?
really do express ourselves differently, and if my brother Philip was here, he has yet another way of expressing himself.
He'd probably be the best one.
Yeah.
Why? What's he say?
He definitely has an accent, a Boston North End accent.
You know what I'm saying?
When?
First 3 rows.
Are you?
Watch. You walked right in like the underjoint. Seriously, watch. I'd be lost without growing up in the city and having these assets. I use them as an asset instead of a liability. You go to a club, you start talking to a babe, and she says, "You Italian?" And she, "What makes you think that?" She says, "You talk like an Italian." And then you start giving it the accent. "Yeah, yous guys, and where yous from, and I'm with 3 of my friends. I chew the football all day, and this, that, and the mother, and stuff like that." And the women, they eat it up. They love that.
Now, in terms of your working as a team, you have to sort of establish a kind of chemistry with the people who you're intruding upon with a camera. What is it about your characters that opens that up?
I think that the number one rule for anybody who's making documentaries, especially the kinds of documentaries that we make, where you rely upon people's trust, is that you have to do whatever it takes to make people comfortable with you. Okay? You know, whether that's a bottle of wine or some other intoxicant, or whether or not it's hanging out. You know, sometimes in our early documentaries, certainly we would spend lots of time.
Hanging out is really important.
I mean, lots of time with people to make them comfortable with us. So that, and you know, I think that's kind of overlooked to some degree these days. But you know, anytime you're going to do anything that takes place over time, certainly, so you can do anything that's kind of longitudinal, you're going to have that kind of a trust. You know,
you also have to listen to people. And I think that's very important. A lot of these people, if you've never been on television and these guys show up from the city, whatever the city may be, with cameras, and they start asking you about your life, you know, that's pretty cool for a lot of people. And that's part of the due diligence that you have to do as a documentarian. You have to sit there and talk to somebody about, you know, how you boil, you know, you boil candle wax, or you know how you direct traffic, or whatever it is, to get to whatever it is you really want to get from them. And then some people come and say, you know, tell me what you need to do, and they hit their marks 2 seconds after you met them, and that's great. But most people aren't like that.
In terms of the sort of the comedic edge to your films, are there other filmmakers whose work you admire who incorporate that sort of sense of comedy and irony?
The guy who did more than anything to bring funny to the documentaries is Michael Moore. And we used to say before Roger and Me, we were the only people doing funny documentaries, and then Roger and Me just completely blew the field wide open, and people go, oh, if you get people to laugh, they actually really pay attention. They come to see your movies, and not incidentally, you can make a lot of money. So, he's what I have issues with him, and I enjoy his films. I think he's a good filmmaker, but he was incredibly important in making that possible for documentaries. So now that you can go to the documentaries and have a really good time.
Not only that, you can see them in theaters. I mean, because the whole economics have completely changed since Michael. So no matter what you think of him or his movies, every single documentary filmmaker who will ever think about getting their movies into a theater or a theatrical situation, which is virtually everybody these days, owes a huge debt to him. And the reason is because his movies were successful and they made a lot of money. Simple as that.
You touched a little bit on Michael Moore's success and how that has sort of changed the field of documentary. Talk a little bit about how I guess the grammar or the language of documentary has changed in the past 30 years or so. How has how filmmakers are approaching storytelling, how has that changed?
It's really amazing. I mean, if you go back to 30 years when we started, 35 years, there were like sort of two forms. There was basically if you take art stuff like Chris Marker kind of stuff off the table, which was really kind of sheer form, there was the kind of the Maisels Pennebaker model, which was no narration, don't give you any clues to what's going on, but you really get to see interesting things unfolding, but there's no context. Or all we do is give you context with a daddy, a voice of God narration that tells you everything you're going to see. If you're lucky, there's little bits of punch through of little moments, but it's extremely rigid and hidebound. So that was kind of the model in the 70s. And now you look at it, there's like, recreations, and there's like, is this fiction, is it not fiction? There's like different versions of things. There's home movies. There's
mockumentaries.
There's everything from something like Tarnation, which has got like 12 zillion different kinds of elements. There's the whole idea of first person, like let me make a film about myself and use all this stuff and interview my family and mix it all together and how much of it's true. And I mean, it's just, and in many ways it's great. On the other hand, if you're sitting in the editing room, it can be sort of overpowering the choices you have.
We take it upon ourselves to present situations clearly and to the best of our ability in the way in which we really believe things are actually happening, to get, in effect, the essence of something. Okay? Now, sometimes that means that there is, there's always selectivity, okay? We're not presenting any kind of objective picture, and anyone who thinks you are, I mean, I thought we kind of buried those arguments a long time ago. I mean, it's all subjective. But as far as our own conscience goes, I think we have to best represent what we think is going on in a particular situation. And that sometimes means that you play around a little bit with sequence. It sometimes means that, yes, you are leaving things out, or you are perhaps aggrandizing some moments more than others. Okay, I mean, but it's as far as the entire piece, the whole goes. What you want people to come out of the theater or out of the after having watched it, whatever the hell they watch it these days, could be on their phones. That you have seen an accurate portrayal of a people, a situation, characters, whatever the hell it is. Okay, you're doing.
1956. Earl Long is reelected in a landslide. He is linked to a stripper named Blaze Starr and will be checked in and out of mental institutions till the end of his term. 1960. Jimmy Davis is reelected on a segregationist platform, rides his horse up the Capitol steps, and 4 years later sings his farewell speech to the legislature.
We'll bring up House Bill 222. The code of ethics not far behind.
Our advice, and it may not be the world's greatest advice, but it worked for us, and I think there's something to be said about it, is go outside of New York. Go away from where there's 20,000 other documentary filmmakers, some of whom have trust funds and really good connections to people in the industry. Go off to New Orleans, go off to Tulsa, Oklahoma, go off to Orlando, Florida, and look for the stories there, because there's stories everywhere. And you can have a lot less competition. You know, you can probably pick up work doing, as we did, pick up local commercial jobs and things like that to pay the bills and buy your equipment and things like that. And that's a good way of kind of getting into things. That's how it worked for us. New Orleans, there was nobody else doing documentaries like us, you know. I remember we did a film and we didn't want to put a narration in, and it freaked out all the local television people. You have to have a narration. You have to tell people what's going on. You know, it's like, no, you don't. They hadn't gotten the news yet, you know.